Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Teeth Matter. I'm your host, Ellie Halabian, DDS, and this episode is really exciting because I'm hosting my very first non-clinician. Yes, you heard me right. I am hosting a non-dentist. I have the pleasure of talking to Kirk Teachout. He is an entrepreneur and, interestingly enough, a practice owner. He shares the practice with his wife, the dentist, and together they've converted a traditional, archaic clinic into a seven-figure practice by only doing dentistry 3 times a week. So I know he has systems in place. He's recognized systems. He's recognized metrics that would allow you to not only create profit doing the dentistry that you do, but also to create a work-life balance that will let you have a long and sustainable career as a dentist. So let's dive into this conversation. Before we dive in, did you know that we're getting ready to launch Teeth Matter Hangouts? It's an exclusive online membership community that gives you access to monthly meetups, 24/7 online support, plus exclusive membership perks when it comes to career development and professional development courses. So if you're interested, feel free to DM us on Instagram or email us at info@teethmatterpod, as in podcast.com. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Teeth Matter. I'm your host, Ellie Halabian, DDS, and this episode is really exciting because I'm hosting my very first non-clinician. Yes, you heard me right. I am hosting a non-dentist. I have the pleasure of talking to Kirk Teachout. He is an entrepreneur and, interestingly enough, a practice owner. He shares the practice with his wife, the dentist, and together they've converted a traditional, archaic clinic into a seven-figure practice by only doing dentistry 3 times a week. So I know he has systems in place. He's recognized systems. He's recognized metrics that would allow you to not only create profit doing the dentistry that you do, but also to create a work-life balance that will let you have a long and sustainable career as a dentist. So let's dive into this conversation. Before we dive in, did you know that we're getting ready to launch Teeth Matter Hangouts? It's an exclusive online membership community that gives you access to monthly meetups, 24/7 online support, plus exclusive membership perks when it comes to career development and professional development courses. So if you're interested, feel free to DM us on Instagram or email us at info@teethmatterpod, as in podcast.com. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Kirk Teachout, thanks so much for being on Teeth Matter. I'm really excited to have you on.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Ellie.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's actually quite interesting because usually I have other clinicians on the podcast and we talk about our frustrations in dentistry, but you are actually not a practicing clinician. Your wife is the clinician. So from there, you've now created this seven-figure dental practice program. So before we dive into all the questions, how did you gravitate toward dentistry? How did you get pulled in?
Yeah, so obviously it's just because my wife's a dentist. It's not because I wanted to necessarily. I found a passion in it because like I like to be a good husband. And 4.5 years ago, when my wife was an associate for a couple of years, she was like, the only way I'm going to pay off this $500,000 in debt quickly anyway is to have practice ownership and to be able to own my own and have autonomy to do what I want. And so she was like, will you help me? I was like, sure. But I'm from the music industry. That's my background, is the music industry and trying to create raving fans in an industry that's so subjective that I only love the art that I make. So now I'm trying to have to create an awesome experience for people to convert to being my raving fans. So in doing that, though, I've learned about marketing. I've learned about creating experience. Learned about just so many things that now I can use from an outside industry to pull into dentistry. So I'm not a career dental person. Um, and sometimes having that outside perspective helps tremendously because we've had, dental coaches, we've had consultants and different things, but there's typically the same approach almost every single time. And so I saw that gap and I was like, man, there's so many things here. I feel like if we just look at it from a different perspective, then we could really innovate in an industry that really hasn't in the last 50 plus years.
You make a great point. As an outsider looking in, I'm actually really curious to know, what did dentistry look like to you?
Scary. like, like not from like oh, I hate the dentist type scary, just like it's an industry I didn't know.
Mm,
Besides, I knew like I needed to get my teeth cleaned every 6 months. I knew that apparently I don't need to chew on ice, things like that. Besides just the normal consumer side, I didn't really know much.
mm,
Um, so besides my wife going through dental school, hearing what she was talking about as she was studying, and then her, practicing as an associate, I didn't know much about the business side. So, we hired coaches, we hired consultants, learned a lot through the fire in general,
mhm.
but it was kind of scary, to be honest. But I'm kind of that go getter of like, okay, well, it's not going to change, so let's just do it. Let's figure it out. Um, but yeah, definitely just a tad scary.
I've heard you say on different podcasts, on different mediums, that you're, like you said, your wife was an associate for working for 2 years and then decided to go into practice ownership. And then 2020 hits, and you guys
Oh
are
man.
practice owners in 2020. You're experiencing COVID. Now, I'm curious to know, coming out of COVID, has dentistry changed? And what does it look like now as
I would
practice owner?
say, yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Yeah, I would say it's changed a little. There for a while, there was this big wave of people coming in that were like, oh man, when I really needed dentistry, dentistry wasn't there for me because it was, mandated to shut down. We were looped in with nail salons and barbershops, which was so weird.
Right.
Um, but and we had patients calling on a daily basis. My face is swollen out to here and we can't do anything.
Hmm.
I'm like, that's an emergency. So we just had to, point them in a different direction. But I feel like after it's kind of settled and the dust is settled now, 4 years after, I feel like people really hold a different weight to dentistry. In different areas it's different, but for the most part, they value it a lot more because they took it almost for granted. Um, in that period of time, that even though it was 2 months and sometimes longer in different areas, I feel like they saw the value and the importance of preventative care more so than just coming in when you have a toothache, at least from what we've seen anyway.
Right. So, what kind of opportunities does that give the new practice owner?
Oh man, so many opportunities because at the end of the day, like if you can educate your patients on preventative dentistry versus defensive dentistry, um, there's so much that you can catch on the front end. Therefore, the patients are happier. Sure, when people come in, like new patients that haven't been in a few years, like they'll have work. Um, but in general, the patients are happier. Therefore, your patient culture is better. Therefore, your team culture is better. Therefore, you enjoy going to work a lot more because people don't have this fear um, of the unknown of what am I going to get into now when I go in because I haven't been in the last 3 years.
Right. Now that you are sharing the responsibilities of practice ownership with your wife, how much of the dental experience do you think you can control as practice owners?
I can control it 100%.
Okay.
I,
Because
I, yeah, I mean, I think I can control it 100%. I mean, there's some unknown variables there, but I mean, I can.
that's great. That's amazing, because a lot of people assume that there's so many things outside their control. They don't know how to gain control of their practice and they feel like other
Sure.
people are running the practice. And that's where that you end up losing money or losing leadership and causing some tension or resentment. And that's where you come in, and this
Right.
whole process comes in, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. And I always quote this very great quote from Extreme Ownership. It's one of the 3 books I ask all my clients to read, because Leif Babin and Jocko Willink say in that book, there are no bad teams, just bad leaders.
Mm.
And I fully agree with that. Because you only can lead what you tolerate. And if you tolerate bad decisions, or yeah, I mean, really bad decisions from patients, from not only patients, but your team, from vendors, from reps, from all these people, then you're only as effective as what you tolerate. And if people see that, then sure, they may not go to that extreme of maybe disrespect or whatever it is, but they'll start letting smaller stuff and get away with the smaller stuff, which will in turn ramp up to bigger things that could potentially kill your practice.
I was going to ask, when you're talking about making these changes, and what was one of the first changes you two decided to make about the practice when you took over?
Yeah. Um, well, the first thing was really not trying to change so much, but the one thing that we changed first off, which was a little difficult to re-educate the patients, was that they had to pay the same day we did the service.
Mm.
That was something that I don't know if it was just the older generation or if we were just running a country club with a tab. Like, I don't know what it was, but that was
Long
something
tab.
oh man, it was, yeah, like a 20-year tab. I was like, oh, okay. And family, friends, and all sorts of, like, okay, I get it. Like, we do, things like that sometimes, but for the most part, like, we had to re-educate our patients. Like, no, we're not just going to send you a bill that you're going to pay 5 months later. We need you to pay today. And that was a little bit of an adjustment, not only for the patients, but for the front desk, who we kept when we bought the practice, because she knew everybody and she was great too.
Mm.
But that was probably the hardest thing for her, was that change, because now, she had to, like, because they were used to just walking out the door like, yeah, just send me a bill. And she was like, oh wait, hold on. Actually, you need to pay that $300 today. And they're like, oh really? I've always just had a bill sent to me. I'm like, well, we're gonna have to not do that anymore. And just training the team on how to overcome that. And then over a good 6 months to a year, we re-educated the patients, and that was okay.
Mm.
Because at the end of the day, most of the patients that push back on that kind of stuff are the ones that you're going to be chasing for 20 years for that $50. So a lot of the protocols and the systems that you need to put in place really get rid of the patients that cause headaches the most.
You're mentioning like education, the importance of re-educating your team and your patients. What are some other roadblocks that you hit in implementing these changes?
Um, I would say some of the roadblocks obviously is just getting comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Mm.
I do this with my sons. I have 4 kids. I have 3 sons and finally had a daughter. Whew. Um, but my 2 oldest are 6 and 5. And at the end of every shower, we turn it to complete cold. And for 30 seconds, they have to count. Um, and for 30 seconds, they are in complete cold. And a lot of times people are like, oh man, you're a drill sergeant. I'm like, no, because now, like 2 weeks after we started that, they were like, we would come in like, hey, you need to get out of the shower. And they're like, no, I haven't done the cold yet. I'm like,
Interesting.
okay. It was hard at first, but they will tell you, if you ask them right now, why do we take cold showers? They will tell you to get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Mm.
And it's a small thing that you can train, but it's going to speak volumes when they get into the world, because that was probably the hardest part, in all of the practice was training the team to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Because when you make a change, there's going to be friction. There's
Right.
going to be uncomfortable moments. And you have to be able to stand your ground, stick to the standard, knowing the vision that we have for the practice and knowing why we're doing it.
Mm.
So the same thing with like the finances, like we need those funds. Like you need that for me to pay you. Like we have to do that.
Right.
I can't just rack up a $300,000 accounts receivable bill and still be able to pay you. I have to be able to pay my loans and be able to pay the office overhead. So, getting comfortable with those tough conversations is very important, but not only from the team side, from the doctor's side.
Mm.
Getting comfortable with having difficult conversations is probably the first thing that I try to do with my clients because a lot of times they're just not comfortable with having those difficult conversations with their team. That's really going to get them to that next level of a 7-figure practice or just really just having a better culture in general. Because when you let things go and you tolerate it, then other things are going to cause drama. They're going to cause
Mm.
even more headache versus that small, hard conversation you have on the front end to nip things in the bud before it becomes a really big headache or a problem.
I mean, uncomfortable conversations, nobody likes them, right? Everyone hates confrontation for the most part, right? Nobody wants to deal with it. But you clearly need to because as a practice owner, you're leading a pack, right?
Yeah,
So when it comes to onboarding or finding people who are maybe share the same vision as you or who are maybe going to be good team players, how do you source them? How do you filter them? How do you gauge who is going to be of value to your team?
sure. And that's a good question. Our best applicants have always been from internal sources because at the end of the day, our team knows the standard,
Mm.
right? Our team is already bought in. So when you can have a warm lead, that's the best place to get it. So we always like when we're looking for a new assistant or a new hygienist or a new front desk, like we're like, hey, do you guys know anybody? Can you text your friends? Because they have friends in the community, they have friends in the industry around there. So like, do you know of anybody who's looking for a change? Because you know what the standard is here, and you know what we're looking for. And typically, those people will tell you, like, especially when people apply, like, hey, I know that person, like they're probably not going to fit our vision. Like,
Mm.
okay, and we'll talk to them, sure. But at the end of the day, like, I know that they're probably not going to fit our vision. And based off the questions we ask, like, they don't. And really, to the second part of that question, that's what it comes down to is right off the bat, something that we do, my wife and I both, is we sell the vision on the front end. We
Mm.
start with, this is what it is. Is that something you want to be a part of? And sure, somebody can lie through their teeth, but then you ask questions, about their personal life. You ask about their goals. You ask about their ambition, um, you know, because at the end of the day, like if your vision is not big enough
Mm-hmm.
for their personal vision and goals, then they're not going to stay. They're not going to buy in to what you are. So anytime, um, you know, like I said, when I work with a client, the very first thing is to see what their vision is and expand on that vision. So that way they can build a bigger, better team. Not necessarily bigger from the sense of volume, like how many people they have on the team, but just a better, robust team that can really perform to what their vision needs to be. Um, but you got to sell that vision and you got to know what your vision is,
Mm.
and get good at it. Because if you can't, then nobody's going to follow you.
That's a great point. And I'm sure there are some people who fall through the cracks. Like you said, some people can lie through their teeth and you might get impressed by, the first interaction or the first meet. Let's say you hire someone and then what you thought they were going to be like doesn't end up being that way. How, as a leader, how much time do you give them or how many chances do you give them before you let them go?
Um, so as a lot of people say, you got to be long to hire and quick to fire.
Mm,
Um, you got to take time, and I get it, especially when you're short staffed and you don't like you're feeling the pressure. You tend to jump the gun and hire just whatever body comes to you, whatever the best of all evils is. But you've got to find the right person. And obviously, like we're not always perfect at this. Nobody's really great at hiring. But you've got to coach them. You got to see if they're coachable on that interview. And if you feel like they are, I'm like, okay, cool. Then when they start, I heard this quote the other day in an interview by somebody. It was like, they're not going to be better than when they start.
mm,
Like, they're not. For the most part, like people start out the gate an all-star, and they're going to start with their best because they want to have that first impression be the
right.
best. So if they're not good on the front end, they're not going to get better.
Mm,
It's kind of like a marriage, like, or dating anybody, right? So it's like, if you're fighting constantly, you think marriage is going to help that? No, it's going to amplify that.
yeah.
It's not going to get better. And as somebody who's been married for 13 years this year, like, it takes work, and it's not just going to get better. So if you have a good relationship on the front end and they're coming out the gate as an all-star, they're only going to get better from there. Like, because they understand what's going to happen. And if they're up here where you need them to be, that's great. But if they're
Right.
not meeting the standard up front, like, there's a reason why we have a 90-day probationary period.
Okay.
Um, where they don't get any benefits. Sure, like we agree, like if they have a vacation already planned or whatever, like that's agreed upon at the first, but we have a 90-day probationary period of like, look, like you're on the chopping block, essentially. It's like, we need to know that you're here, and you're here for us, and you're here for the team, and you're here for the patients, and you're passionate about this vision that we have. Because at the end of the day, like, we need to know that you're going to live up to the standard that we have. But yeah, if they're not upholding that standard on the front end, it's not going to get better.
I love what you just said, and somebody had mentioned that to me too before. I interviewed Ryan Coulon. He's a dentist in Texas, and he mentioned you have to hire slow and fire fast. So
Yeah,
you that resonates with me, and you're absolutely right when it comes to also making that adjustment when it needs to happen. Because obviously, if you don't, then it's going to cause, as you said earlier, it's going to have a ripple effect into a lot of different aspects of the practice and affect not only the team but also the quality of work that you do.
yeah,
So very important in terms of managing that and basically pivoting if you need to. Now, going back to changes and making changes, obviously when you make a change, you're not reaping the benefits immediately, right? Sometimes you might see some loss before you see some growth or
sure.
gains. So how do you mentally prepare for those losses?
Uh, you got to look to your vision. It's like, you got to know why you're doing it. You got to have a big why, right? I do this to help my wife and my kids. I help support and take everything that is not required by her license to do and take it off of her plate.
Mm,
That is my goal. And that's my why, to be able to serve my wife, to be able to serve my kids, and be the leader that I need to be for my family. You have to have a good, strong why. So that way, when you do get into those trenches, you're able to remember that why, and it be enough to make the right decisions to figure out where you're going to come out and how high of a
mm,
peak you're going to come out on the back end. Um, but, the changes, sometimes you just got to have faith and be okay with, okay, I made the wrong decision. I apologize, but, we're going to pivot. One of the big things that we changed, not initially, but after COVID, was coming back 3.5 days a week instead of just 4. And we asked the team, we're like, hey, if we cut down a Thursday afternoon, like, would you guys want to do that? We're not paying you more, but would you guys be okay with that? And they were like, yeah. And we implemented a bonus system to try to supplement the difference, but they're like, yeah. Well, the change there was night and day different
mm,
from like that week to the next week. we had more energy. The team culture just like exploded because we just cut out 3 hours. Like that wasn't crazy. And
Right.
that next month was our biggest month we've ever had.
Interesting. No, I
It
mean, it makes sense. Go ahead.
No, it was crazy, right? It's because it's counterintuitive. It's like, oh, we're scaling back, but yet we're doing more. And then a year later, after my wife had our third child and was on maternity leave, we cut down to 3 days. So the team is still
Mm.
there 3.5 days, but we're only there 3 days. And that was the year that we hit 7 figures, even scaling down even more, because we learned that by having more days off than on, we had more ability to mentally rest, to be able to physically rest, and also spend more time with our kids. Because ultimately, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to create a lifestyle practice where we can spend the time with our kids as they're young, but also have the income and the business to run to be able to do more things with them. Um, but still, those changes, like you're saying, like sometimes there is a loss. It's like I know, like from COVID, it took us a good 4 months to get, like, sure, like our best month was that next month, but it took us a good 4 months to get momentum back up anyway.
Hmm.
Um, at one point we were hacked, and that was fun. Um, but we had to go through that. And for 3 weeks, we were down. We had to completely revamp our computer systems. No data was lost, but still, like, we had to redo our stuff. And I knew like it was going to take a good 4 months to get back into the swing of things. My wife's maternity leave, 4 months to get back
Mm.
into the swing of things. And I knew that timetable like clockwork. Now we can alleviate it because we hired our first associate and now we're only working 2 days a week and yet we're doing more. So, you know, once you figure out the secret sauce and you create the systems to put in place, then things start really meshing and going into place. The team is less reluctant to change, and have really like gathered around to create a really amazing culture and business that everybody really wants.
It seems like just like you said, you've tapped into a system which has allowed you to now build this seven-figure practice, going from 3 days a week to 2 days a week. Obviously, you've brought on more and more team members to help grow that. It's well for someone who maybe is thinking about entrepreneurship but is not ready to like fully embrace practice ownership. They might be thinking about like renting a chair and
Sure.
working by themselves and maybe having a virtual assistant. I don't know, but if someone who is looking to take that first step, do you think they can also become that seven-figure practice just by themselves, or do you think that you need that team?
So you're only as good as your team.
Mm.
Um, and our team is great, but we still have team struggles. Like you're always going to have struggles. Like there's never a time where you're just coasting, because when you're not growing, you're dying. Like,
Mm.
period. So you're always going to have struggle, especially with your team. But I would I would argue that unless you're doing all on fours, unless you're doing like crazy large procedures all the time, that I don't believe you could. Um, like I know GPs that are super GPs, whatever you want to call them, that are, doing a ton of larger procedures that are making multiple 7 figures. But at the end of the day, like, they're doing those bigger procedures where they're charging $50,000 per procedure and they're doing, 5 of those a month. Whereas what we do is, and what I saw anyway, was that we spent $500,000 on learning how to be a general practitioner.
Mm.
Like, we need to maximize what we just spent so much money learning.
Right.
Not spend another $50,000 learning implants, not spending
Mm.
another $20,000 learning ortho, or so on and so forth. Like, there's a place for that, and we have that. But like, we're in a rural area and we don't do dentures, which is counterintuitive to a rural area where we have a ton of them. We could, but we don't, because that's not the dentistry we want to do. We could do a ton of cosmetic cases. My wife does a few a year, but we don't, that's not like the bread and butter of our office. we're heavy PPO. Now we're moving
Mhm.
fee for service, but we've been able to create something where you maximize crown and bridge and restorative dentistry without having to spend a ton of money outside to really feel like you're increasing that. And it doesn't feel as chaotic as most people think, as long as you create the systems.
It seems like a lot of emphasis is put onto scheduling, right? Because you're not
Yes.
going out there and doing all of these extravagant procedures like all on fours or all on
Yeah.
X. So, how important is scheduling to being a successful practice?
It's everything. Because I mean, I that's what I talk about heavily, and I've polled my audience so much, and that's what they want. They were like, nobody understands or can figure out why one day they're doing 27 fillings on
Mm,
16 different patients, and they barely did $4,000 in production on one day, and then the next day they see 5 patients and they did $12,000, and it's not arduous. And they're like,
mm,
why is that? Well, it's because you don't have a systematic approach to your schedule. And that's what I do primarily. I have yet to find a doctor that, even if they're rocking and rolling and doing $2 million a year on their own, that I can't make their schedule more efficient and less chaotic.
mm,
Because it's all about the systemization of their schedule. And when you do the same things over and over and over again, you're going to get faster, and you're also going to have better quality faster. So now, sure, like, you can do high volume, but if you do high volume, you're going to get burned out all the time anyway. So what you do is you have a systematic approach to have a dance to where your team is trained to not only schedule it efficiently, but also how to run that schedule efficiently.
mm.
Because it doesn't matter if your front desk knows how to schedule it efficiently. If your clinical team doesn't know how to run it, then you're still going to feel like you're running around like crazy and it's just chaos. So you gotta make sure that your schedule is everything. And we revisit that. I mean, we revisit it about once every quarter. Like, okay, what bottlenecks do we have?
Mm.
And our team will give us that information. Like, we know, but they see it from a different perspective. So we ask them, like, where are you seeing the bottlenecks in the schedule? We're like, man, there's 5 across at 10 o'clock and it's always running into lunch a little bit. I'm like, okay, well, cool. Let's alleviate that. How can we provide a solution to alleviate that? And so we work as a team to make sure that things run smoothly on a regular basis.
Clearly, to be a successful practice, you need to buckle down and focus on the small details and work through the small details in order to create those systems. But maybe what are some of the other qualities or characteristics of being a successful practice owner?
Oh man, I would say figuring out who your ideal patient is. I'm a huge proponent of firing your patients. I I say that, and people are like,
Kind of
what?
hard to do, no?
Yeah, but it's not like like it once again, like, if you get comfortable with being uncomfortable and educating your patients,
Mm,
most of the systems you put in place and protocols you put in place are going to get rid of your problem patients.
mm,
Like, for instance, through 2 or 3 years ago now, I dropped 12 of our worst insurances with our worst reimbursements. Well, that got rid of probably 80% of the worst patients that we were seeing. And figuring that out, like that,
right.
you're not going to miss them. They're the ones that never accepted the treatment anyway. And when you did present a root canal, they were moaning about how they had to pay $300 for the root canal. And
Right.
yet they spend $1,200 on Botox the next time. You're like, what?
Yeah.
Like, okay, so not the ideal patient. um, but yet, still having the right mindset, doing it legally and ethically, and there's a way to do it. Um, but letting your patients go, whether that's quietly dismissing them or in person dismissing them. I mean,
Mm,
I had it where I dismissed 3 patients in one day, and it just all like came up together on that one day for some reason. But you know, whether your team is disrespected, whether they're, cursing at them and just having a bad experience, like from the patient to your team, like, we back up our team, and we'll walk in like, hey, we don't accept that here. This is how we act. We're going to act in a professional manner to provide you the best quality care. But it takes mutual trust and respect. Is that something that you can do?
Mm.
Just ask that question. And, most of the time, people, when you have that very tough conversation, most of the time people don't realize what they're doing. And they may be having a bad day. And I get that. And we always approach it with empathy. But, you know, and most of the time, those patients will apologize. Like, I'm so sorry. And they're the best patients after that conversation. It's amazing. So having those difficult conversations is important, but still being able to stand your ground when they don't want to change. And just being like, look, once again, like, it takes a relationship takes mutual trust and respect. And it seems like that is severed here. Like, I just need to make sure that that is okay. If that's not okay, then, I would be happy to find a different office for you.
Mm.
And most of the time, those are the patients that walk out anyway. And, we have a legal and ethical way that we go about that in our process. And, now we don't dread seeing them on the schedule because they're not there anymore. So if you have patients, when you look at the schedule, that you dread seeing them, maybe it's time to have a difficult conversation.
Mm. You're absolutely right. I mean, I think most people are afraid of the legal ramifications of dropping a patient, but also the reviews, right? We have access to the internet and people write reviews and they don't want to look bad or have that conversation like flow into the reception room and
Sure.
people overhearing it. So I think people are intimidated by that
Sure.
conversation, but clearly it can do you more good because it seems to be a very mature conversation depending on how you go about it.
Right. Yeah. You have to regulate your emotions. If you can't regulate your emotions and you get heated really quick, I would say maybe focus on a couple other things before you get to that point. um, but yeah, if you can have those conversations, it's addition by subtraction, right?
Mm.
So like, you get rid of the problem patients, and therefore you're happier when you come to work. Your team's happier when you come to work, or when they come to work. And so it just really creates a safe environment, which is what ultimately everybody wants, where they feel mutual respect and trust. But as far as the review side, I know that's the number one objection that I have when I ask them to fire a patient. And they're like, but what if they leave me a one-star review and they badmouth me to all their friends? I'm like, great. They're doing your job for you, because now, right? Birds of a feather flock together. So that problem patient has friends that are not great patients as well. So now all the people that potentially were going to come to your practice are not, and you don't have to worry about dismissing them. So by dismissing them one patient, you've done the work of 10 other people. I mean, it's so good. And as far as the review goes, like, sure, that's great. We got a 1-star review the other day. And you know what? The 500 other 5-star reviews demolish those 3 or 4
Mm.
that we have. And people are smart. Don't discount the intelligence of all the people out there looking at your reviews. When they see those 3 1-star reviews, they don't care, because they see the awesome 5-star reviews that you have, and they know that those three 1-star reviews were just disgruntled people in general, and we're going to leave you a 1-star review regardless.
I never even thought about it like that, that they're doing the work for you and keeping those types of patients out of your office. It just never occurred to me that way. I just saw that one patient as like the holding it all over my head type of thing. But no, you're absolutely right. Before we sign off, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you'd like to share with the audience?
Sure. I would say if you're starting to feel burnout, I would start scaling back. Just because, and have faith, and reach out. Like, I'll help anybody who reaches out, and give free advice. But I would say that that's been the biggest turn to our practice's success, has been scaling back. Because most of the time, like, people feel like they're busy 4 or 5 days a week, and yet our office is outpacing them on 3 days a week. When you cut out a day, it comes down to Parkinson's law, right? So Parkinson's law is that you fill the time that's allotted for the task. Best analogy is that, you had that term paper in college, and when did you wait to do it? Maybe a week before, maybe. I was the night before, right? And that was before ChatGPT, everybody.
Right.
So I actually had to do it. And yet I still got a passing grade. Maybe it wasn't 100, but still, like, I got a passing grade. I did it the night before. And so I allotted a day or a few hours before it was due to do it. And yet I got it done. So if you allot 3 days a week or 3.5 days a week, 4 days a week, whatever it is, you're going to fill that time. And so, when, for instance, if it snows on a Monday and you work Tuesday through Thursday, you got to figure out a way to make those Monday patients fit the schedule throughout the week, and you figure it out. So what we did was we just figured it out every single week, and now it's a normal rhythm. So if you're wondering about how to do that, like, just have faith and know that it can work. And if you have questions, like I said, feel free to reach out. I will answer any of them.
If someone wants to tap into those systems and learn from you, where can they reach you? What are the platforms that you're on? Can you please share some of the contact info?
Yeah, of course. The easiest way to get a hold of me is Instagram at Kirk Teachout. I'm on there all the time, talking to hundreds of docs every single month, and I love it. I love being able to engage with people. They could also download a free guide of, like, some steps that we took to, like, being able to discount no-shows and being able to get rid of the patients, like we've talked about, at the7figuredentist.com. You got to spell out 7. But they can do that, schedule a call with me there if they want to. But that's the easiest way to get a hold of me.
Perfect. Kirk, thanks so much for being on the show. I really appreciate your insight. I'm sure a lot of other people do as well. I know a lot of people are interested in taking on the next step with their career and maybe opening up a practice. And I think it's good to have these principles before you do, so that you could start off on the right foot and not, be preventative measures as opposed to reactive measures. So thanks again for being on. I appreciate your time.
Yeah. Thanks, Dr. Ellie.
All right. So I'm going to stop that. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow our podcast, write a review, leave a comment. Anything you share with us goes a long way. And if you think a friend will appreciate this podcast, then make sure you share it with them too. Until next time, cheers. Hi, I'm Ellie Halabian, and I'm the founder and creator of Teeth Matter, a podcast that brings to you real talk between different dental professionals in order to help each one of us navigate our careers. Now, if you're a D3 student, a D4 student, or maybe even a dental resident who struggles with day-to-day dentistry, or maybe doesn't know what their next step is, then Teeth Matter Hangouts is for you. It's an exclusive membership community that allows you to connect, vent, and ask questions so that you can take your next step with confidence. It provides 24/7 online support, plus you get membership perks when it comes to CE courses or professional development courses. Check out our website for more info. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow our podcast, write a review, leave a comment. Anything you share with us goes a long way. And if you think a friend will appreciate this podcast, then make sure you share it with them too. Until next time, cheers.